Welcome to Notes 2.6 for U.S. history. These are Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal, so we're looking at the 1930s and what Roosevelt did once he got elected as president. We've already talked about Hoover and president, but here you see a chart that kind of compares how both presidents dealt with the Depression. So Hoover tried to trickle down economics, helping businesses, thinking that would help people. He did do some things to try to fix the banks, like the Reconstruction Finance Corporation and the NCC, National Credit Corporation, but both just didn't have the funds to help. He had a little bit of public works, like building the Hoover Dam, but just not enough spending, again, to allow this to really help the individuals out there. And ultimately, he did not support direct relief to the people. He didn't want to give people money. He felt like that left them dependent on the government. It didn't help them. People needed to get themselves out of it. So that was Hoover's plan. Franklin Roosevelt's plan was very different. And if you look at Roosevelt's plan here, FDR's plan, so I'm going to use FDR and Roosevelt interchangeably here. It's known as the first New Deal and the second New Deal. So overall, the New Deal. We'll talk a little bit about the differences between the two later on. It was about doing something, about change. He did do a banking holiday, so he also addressed banks. He actually closed the banks to try to stop the closures, free up some money, do some things to help. So he actually regulated them, closed them, and then reopened them. We'll talk about those a little bit later. He actually had direct government involvement in farming, in industry, debt relief for Americans, public works and emergency relief. He was going to directly impact the American people. And so his plan really went straight to the people. He increased government spending. Remember, Hoover didn't want to go into debt or raise taxes, so he did not really increase the spending. So you see Hoover trying to help businesses, but not the individuals with money. FDR gave everybody money, huge influx of money to try to stimulate the economy. It didn't help overnight. We'll talk about that towards the end of these notes, but you can see very different plans for the two presidents. And people felt like Roosevelt was doing something where they felt like Hoover had done nothing. When Roosevelt was even nominated as the presidential candidate for the Democrats, he went to Chicago to give his acceptance speech. It was the first ever acceptance speech by a presidential hopeful. And he promised a new deal for the American people. This is actually the speech, part of the speech that you read. You read a part of the speech in class when we looked at the two plans, Hoover and FDR. So he promised a new deal. He was all about hope and optimism, and people responded to that. So in the election of 1932, FDR won in a landslide vote. So just look at these numbers. Franklin Roosevelt got 472 of the Electoral College votes, and Hoover got 59. That's 23 million popular votes for FDR to less than 16 million for Hoover. So people were happy to have another choice. They wanted to see change, and Roosevelt gave them that. The change was not always successful, but he did give them change. So he was inaugurated on March 4th, 1933, and by that time we had had over 4,000 banks that had collapsed and closed, which means 9 million savings accounts that were just gone. So 9 million people who have no more money. And think about how much money they probably had in there. 38 different states had actually had to close their banks because they kept running out of money. And in addition to that, we have 25%, 1 in 4 Americans are unemployed. We have people who are living in Hoovervilles, people who just don't have jobs and homes, and they want change. So this is where Roosevelt promises he's going to make a difference. And in his inaugural address, he is famous for this phrase, "Let me assert that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. This nation asks for action, and action now." So you've heard that phrase, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and that comes from Roosevelt during this time period. Now, Roosevelt didn't have a clear-cut plan when he took office. He just needed to do something, and he knew he needed to do something. He talked about bold, persistent experimentation, trying something, and if it doesn't work, try something else. So in his first 100 days, and we actually talk about the first 100 days of his presidency often, Congress passed 15 major acts at Roosevelt's request. So this is more than any other time in U.S. history, and together these 15 things became known as the New Deal. So Roosevelt's New Deal is the first 15 acts that were passed during his first 100 days in office. Here you see him signing these bills into law, and that really starts to make a big change in America. People finally see the government as doing something. One of the things that was done in his first 100 days is the bank holiday. They close all of the banks in the United States for 4 days. And the idea is to restructure them and start to actually regulate the banks. So this bank holiday, they passed the Emergency Banking Relief Act, and they're examined back by the Treasury Department. They decide this is a way to end the banking crisis. So that's what they're attempting with the bank holiday. And here you see a list of some of the other New Deal programs from Franklin Roosevelt's first New Deal. You do not need to know all of these. However, you should learn 2 or 3 of them, probably actually 3 or 4, to know what they are. AAA, CCC, the National Industrial Recovery Act, the Securities Act, the Public Works Administration, TVA, Tennessee Valley Authority. So all of these are programs put into place to try to fix certain issues. And we're doing some work with this in class, so I'm not going to talk about every group in together. But this is a list of the first New Deal programs. And then here we have a list of the second New Deal program. So these were passed after FDR's first 100 days. So still in his first administration, but they were passed a little bit later. The WPA, the Social Security Act, the Banking Act, the Resettlement Act. So these all also impact people and make a big difference for them. So we see he passes multiple pieces of legislation, all aimed at giving relief from the Great Depression. So then what's the difference between the first and second New Deal? That's an excellent question. The first New Deal really focuses on immediate relief for people in need. So immediate help to citizens, it's going to help people right now, right this minute, because things are so desperate. The second New Deal is more about long-term help, reforming the system, changing those. So they want to fix things they didn't get in the first New Deal, but also they want to actually change the system. So the first one, immediate relief. The second one is what can we do to make this last longer? So that's kind of a way to look at the 2 New Deals and understand the difference. So both passed by FDR, both in his first term. First New Deal in the first 100 days, second New Deal during the rest of his term. So all of this sounds great, but there are actually a lot of people out there during this time period who are not supporters of the New Deal. And it's funny because you have on both sides. They actually saw Roosevelt almost as moderate, even though he's actually pretty extreme during the time period. So first of all, Roosevelt is considered a liberal, but there are a lot of liberals out there who don't support what he did. They don't feel like he did enough to solve the problems. And some of those people are people like Senator Huey Long, Father Coughlin, who is a radio host, thought it was too moderate. Dr. Francis Townsend, also a liberal. All of these guys said, it's not doing enough. We need to do more to stop the Depression. Roosevelt's too moderate, not doing enough, not helping the people enough. So he was criticized by his own side, his own party, for that. Then on the other side, the conservative side, so this would have been the Republicans and the people who supported Hoover, they felt like it gave the government too much power. It's doing too much. The federal government should not have the right to do this. It's stepping on the rights of the states, so people who support states' rights didn't like it. They didn't like the deficit spending. So they had all kinds of things that upset them about the New Deal, that it just wasn't the federal government's role, and they were expanding too much and taking over things that were not part of their responsibility. The big group that led these charges and these critiques was the American Liberty League. So we have some different individuals, Huey Long, Father Coughlin, on our liberal side, and we have the American Liberty League on the conservative side. But what we need to know is all of these people were critical of the New Deal. However, the public supported the New Deal. So we have the American public feels like something is finally happening and they support it. But there is a little problem that FDR runs into here. While he has public support, the Supreme Court does not always see the New Deal as being constitutional. So they actually declare several of his programs, including the NIRA, National Industrial Recovery Act, the AAA, Agricultural Adjustment Administration, SSA, Social Security Administration, and the Wagner Act, they start to look at those in 1936. So they actually declare some of these unconstitutional, and they're looking at declaring others unconstitutional. So Roosevelt, who feels like these are really helping, wants to do something to stop them from doing that. So how do you get the Supreme Court to declare your laws constitutional if they feel they're not? Well, Roosevelt comes up with this new idea, court packing. So he decides he's going to pack the court full of justices that support his ideas. So Roosevelt claims the court is overburdened, they have too many cases, they're just too busy. So he actually tries to add new justices to the Supreme Court. So he sends a bill to Congress that says for each justice who's over 70 because they're older and that's a big burden and they just can't keep up, we'll add a new justice. That means actually out of the 9 Supreme Court justices, he would get to add 6 new justices, which would make it 15. Which means that if he did that, then he would have 6 justices on the Supreme Court that would definitely support his programs. So that's why he's thinking this is a good idea. So if he adds them, that's going to swing the court in his favor, and they will uphold his programs. Now, Congress is like, no, they don't let him do this. They don't let him do this, but what they do is they allow the Social Security Act and the Wagner Act does get through the Supreme Court, and they see that there's popular support, so the Supreme Court, while still finding some of the acts and actions of the New Deal unconstitutional, does not find as many of them unconstitutional. So I've mentioned a few times that the public supported the New Deal. Well, part of that is because Roosevelt used the new media to reach out to the public and talk to them. So he actually let the people know what his plan was and how he was going to deal with these things. And this whole use of the radio was called fireside chats. Roosevelt every week would have weekly addresses where he would talk to the American people. They called them fireside chats because they would sit by the fire listening to the radio as a family and listen to Roosevelt explain his plans, his programs, and what he wanted to do, what the goal was. And so people really felt like they knew what was happening, they knew what he was trying to do, and they supported those things. So this use of the media, Roosevelt's really the first president to do that, and it really helps him gain support. So throughout his administration, FDR continues to pass legislation trying to improve the economy. So he is elected to a second term in 1936, and during that time he passes the National Housing Act, the Farm Security Administration, Fair Labor Standards Act. So he continues to push for more regulation, more change to try to improve the economy. So the economy does improve during his presidency. He remains very popular with the people because they see change and they see him trying to make change happen. Now, it improves, but it does not improve quickly. It's not steady. There are times where it goes down. In fact, in 1937, there's another recession, but it never gets as bad as it was at the peak of the Great Depression. So there is a slow, steady increase in our economy and in people's lives during that time period. And the big piece to this and the takeaway from the New Deal is that the one lasting impact, besides some of these programs, I mean, we all still have Social Security and all these other programs, but the big lasting impact that FDR and the New Deal have on America is that it increases the government's role in the average American's life. We expect the government to do things today when things go bad. When the economy crashes, we expect to have certain programs. We expect Medicare. We expect Social Security. So the expectation of the American people is that government is involved in their lives, where prior to the New Deal in the 1930s, people did not expect government to be involved in their lives. So this is the end of your notes for the New Deal, notes 2.5 on FDR and the New Deal. That is also the ends of your notes for Unit 2. So make sure that you know what's in all 5 sets of notes. If you have to, go back through, study for them. You have a quiz on Monday and your unit test is coming up, so make sure you know all this material. Bring any questions you have to class, and we'll see you tomorrow.